What if you could design your week the way that top companies design their best products? In today's episode, I'm joined by Howard Steinman, an executive coach with over 25 years of leadership experience, including roles at global consulting firms and as a technology executive at Amazon. Howard shares how the working backwards approach, famously used at Amazon, can be applied far beyond product development to the way that you plan your time, set your goals, and shape your everyday life. We're going to explore how starting with a clear vision with things like I want Friday to feel light, accomplished, and connected can help you reverse engineer your week for more purpose and ease. Y'all, I'm so excited for this conversation. And if you are ready to lead more intentionally at work and at home, then let's do this. Hey, Howard, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, Danielle. Great to see you today.
So I'm pretty excited to have Howard here with me because we met through a mutual friend and coach. And we realized that we really share some values in terms of wanting people to live full, amazing lives and to be able to lead at work in ways that they feel really great about, and then to be also able to be present at home as well. So Howard, I'm really excited that we get to do this.
Hey, so glad to be here, outside of my, day job or jobs, right? I do have a home life. I'm married, I have kids, and I really admire the angle and approach you're taking here, Danielle. And it really just led me to think that the stuff that I've learned and have done at work have even more applicability on the home front and especially in the audience and the folks that you work with. And so really excited for our conversation today.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about your story. I know that you have a really interesting and rich background in terms of your work life, and I know that you're in a pivot moment right now too, so I'd love to hear about that.
Sure. No, thank you for asking. Yeah, start off life as a lawyer, graduated law school, practiced law, and I just found it kind of boring. It kind of fell into the life of being first a lawyer at a management consulting company and eventually becoming a management consultant. So what does that mean? I work with other companies and in many cases, the federal government, US federal government agencies to help them get clear on what their organizations are trying to do and how they can execute. And the commercial context, a lot of times that's, increased shareholder value, increased profits, and even more enriching and the more greater focus of my career in the federal government, it's enabling missions from the Department of Defense to the Environmental Protection Agency, so on and so forth. So I've had a really fun, exciting career working across most of the government sectors and agencies and helping those leaders get clear on their organization's missions. And it's been really fun. So, and like anything else, you do that for 2 decades plus. And I found over my life that, really developing and nurturing and working with teams and people is really where my passion lies. And so as opposed to running consulting practices, to your point, pivoting to becoming an executive coach where I can work with folks in their career, maybe as young in their maybe late 20s, early 30s, and some folks as we maybe were talking offline here, approaching retirement age at 70 to figure out like what's next. And so with that, excited to kind of get that business off and running and really excited to kind of begin that next chapter of my career.
Absolutely. One through line that I really recognize in your experiences is being able to draw either individuals or groups or teams or organizations to a place where they are experiencing clarity. And so I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what a process is like for you and, like how do you help people find clarity?
Yeah, no, it's great. And thank you for asking. Yeah, someone had said early on, and I didn't even realize this, that I had an adept ability to find the signal in the noise. And so, right, being a consultant, to thrive, you have to manage through ambiguity. And so, how does one do that? And that's something that I really enjoy. Some people will find it maybe really scary, but for me, it's something of a challenge of trying to take a big mess, a bowl of spaghetti, and kind of get those strands maybe all lined up in a row to kind of understand and how to organize in my life. Maybe it's the logical aspect of being kind of trained and being a practicing lawyer, but applying that to a business into life has been something that's been really exciting to me. And some of the principles along the way, approaches and methods that I've learned have served me well and can kind of apply in both workplace as well as life. So with that, certainly can go into that more, but that's really in a nutshell, that your perception is spot on in the sense that those are aspects that have kind of served me well over the last 25 years. And in many ways, some of the coaching clients I'm working with and look to work with in the future have sought me out to help them with just that.
I think that the ability to find joy and possibility and spaces of ambiguity is banana peel's useful skill. And I know that, I've always kind of enjoyed those liminal spaces that
Yeah.
I think, for other people, like you said, it can feel like noise instead of possibility. And
Yeah.
so I know that one of your processes is this sort of like work backwards process.
Yeah.
And could you talk a little bit about, what would be the first step and like, or what does it even mean to
Yeah.
work backwards?
No, absolutely. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and from that standpoint, that is something that Amazon had kind of coined, but it's something that was a tried and true principle throughout my consulting career. So if you stop and think at any situation that you find yourself in, to your point where you can't see the proverbial forest from the trees and really feel maybe overwhelmed with what's happening, you have to stop and really, think and envision, what does the end result look like? What do I want to achieve? And that could be a business objective, or it could be, a life objective, right? No one gives you a manual when you become a parent, and you have to kind of figure it out on your own. But yeah, you encounter situations, and whether it's what I want to accomplish for making lunch later that day for the kids when they come home, or whether it's something a bit more maybe not that does not meaningful, but or substantial, if you will, in your home life or work life. What does that look like? What does it look like when the goal is accomplished? What does it look like when I complete the task that I think I need to go complete? And write that down. So that if you want to call that your end state or your future state, like what does that look like? What does success look like? What are the criteria? How will I know I achieved that aspect of whatever I'm looking for? And then from that standpoint, you can backwards, right? From that and understand, what are the things I need to do, discrete steps. Many times they build upon each other. Many times they're a bit not as linear, but could be a bit more circuitous, and kind of plan those accordingly and understand what are those kind of stepping stones you need to get to that end. So if you begin with the end in mind and work backwards from there, it can make the end and what you're trying to achieve a lot less daunting. And that's not to say that if you plan something out steps 1 to 10, that at some point along the way you might need to course correct. Certainly not saying that life doesn't change and you need to kind of adjust accordingly. But hopefully your end goal doesn't necessarily change. And if it does, you might have to reset. But that standpoint, if you at least begin going down a path with purpose and a bit more clarity, it won't see as daunting as it does when you're in the moment figuring out, geez, how the heck am I going to get to whatever it is, the end of the hour, end of the day, end of the week?
I love that. I love that you mentioned that even when you start with the end in mind, that it might require some pivots along the way
Yeah.
and after you've planned it. And because I do think that it's so easy to get so attached to the plan or so attached even to the outcome. Or, one of the things that I've noticed, and maybe I'm just fickle, but, is that I'll work really hard to be able to make sure that I have the end in mind that I want.
Right.
And once I've created those sort of backward steps, as I'm going through those steps, all of a sudden I realize, ooh, what I thought was the end
Right.
I wanted, I actually think I want something else, you know?
That's there.
And kind of balancing when do I need to stick with that and when is that actually the process? And
Right.
so, I'd be really interested in hearing your experiences with some of the stuff that people struggle with when you work it backwards kind of system with people.
No, no, great points. A great question. I mean, I guess first or almost where you start out, there's the old like, take some poetic license here. The old Mike Tyson line that he did when he was at his height of his career. That everyone has the strategy to beat me until they step into the ring and take the first punch.
Yeah.
Well, you could apply that to life and other aspects of your working backwards plan, right? You could have this kind of mental model of what's going to occur and how things are going to transpire, right? And you kind of take that first step, and you're like, "Whoa, this is not what I expected." But your point, and I think the one that you alluded to, it's a little further down the path when maybe things do change. And so first of all, take stock and celebrate the things that you have accomplished, and don't always maybe understand that if the end goal has shifted or you haven't achieved it, that there were incremental successes along the way, and don't beat oneself up about that per se, but understand where it is. And sure, is it a total left or right turn? Depending on the circumstance, it could be. But if not, then maybe it's just a little shade of left or right of center. And that's okay, because right, life is not static, as we talked about before. and the world around us evolves constantly, and we have to adjust. And if anything, if you want to be perceptive of it, and the worst case you can, do, if you will, the worst mistake you can make is kind of be, damn the world around me, I'm going to go execute my plan. That doesn't really work. Yeah, I've seen that fail many times in consulting, right? And there, you have an unhappy customer, but even more so in life and other home front situations. What is that? What do you really achieve when you achieve your plan when the plan itself is kind of out of date and not really, the plan that you needed, and you knew that going in. So I mean, I think you have to give yourself some grace in that regard, and such. Another way to think through things, another, I'll call Amazon principle that comes into mind that I always found interesting in framing things is that, you have to understand, like, when you're beginning to make decisions, not all decisions are equal. And Amazon, a really neat way of thinking through this. They called it one-way and two-way door decisions. And this was a Jeff Bezos thing, right? And so two-way door is, could you decide quickly, in the sense that if you walked through the door, made a decision and keep walking the door, and went, whoa, this isn't what I thought it was, you could actually go back. A
Wow.
one-way door decision was, it's a significant decision. Think about substantial life things, whether it's, putting a down payment on a house, you picking up and moving, things that maybe are not easily reversible. That's a one-way door decision. And those things do need the time, care, fact base around there to really evaluate. But the mistake that one can make is to kind of treat everything like a one-way door decision. And therefore you get into a lot of stasis or wheel spinning and such. And that's where you can get stuck. And that's where, back to the point of working backwards and finding that signal the noise. That's where sometimes people don't, yet move forward, because they're treating decisions that are important, but maybe not as important as others, all the same way. And if you don't do that and put that practice into play, you'll see that you're able to make progress more often than you think.
I love distinguishing between what's a one door and what's a two door
Yeah.
decision.
Yeah.
Because, one thing that I've been really aware of is that we live in a time where there are a lot of options. And I think
Yeah.
that's amazing. Like, I mean, take even something as simple as like the types of food that are available for you at the supermarket. I don't
Yeah.
know, like growing up, I couldn't eat avocado, you know? And now like it's so easy to like get guacamole, get avocado. And so while that's really wonderful, it also means that we are making way more decisions. Like that is the signal,
Correct.
the noise stuff. And, working with folks as well is, myself, I think it is really easy to start treating everything as equally important. If you have a neurodivergence, so I know people with ADHD or,
Mhm.
if you're on the spectrum, like that can also be an incredible like struggle is that everything seems equally urgent. And so having a tool like the one way or two-way door system
Yeah.
as a way to help you start distinguishing between those things is so, so helpful. Do you
Yeah.
find that is it harder to help people figure out what that end goal is? Or do you find it's harder to figure out what the steps are that would lead to that end goal?
Good question. Another mentor of mine once said, and I've seen this and I've used this with both clients and coaching clients and organizational clients, like, you want to go slow to go fast. So more
Interesting.
often than not, people don't spend the time thinking about where they want to head, and they just kind of get going. And so that can be a lot of potentially, it's unfortunately wasted energy, because it may seem like you're moving fast, but if you're not moving fast with that goal or the end in mind, then where are you moving to, right? And from that standpoint, I think taking the time up front to really think through what are those endpoints, make it a lot easier to, and give you the clarity and the confidence to move forward on those steps that you mentioned before. And then when you just need to also then have that point we made before, the perception that, when the world does change around you, don't have the kind of tunnel vision or blinders on to kind of see it through. And some personality types, that's even harder than the go slow to go fast, right? They see a checklist and they want to check everything off of it. And even if numbers 7 to 10 on the checklist are no longer relevant, then maybe you need to come up with a new, set of numbers 7 to 10.
I love that. I've been following Joe Hudson, who studies a lot of does a lot of emotional work.
Mhm.
And one of the things that he challenges is this notion of like what is efficiency? And would say that like if you're driving the most efficient car, it's not the car that goes the fastest. And yet like we tend to like associate efficiency with like speed, but that like what you're talking about with like going slow to go fast, right? Is the quality, right? That when you take the time to know what the value is and to learn what that end goal is, that then as you design backwards, all of those decisions are really thoughtfully advancing you to where you want to go. Where if you don't really know where you're going to go, well, this is like a really weird thing, but and I'm kind of throwing this at you, but I've been like playing
It's
around
good.
with this idea of, what's the difference between direction and destination?
Mhm.
And I think that sometimes what we need is a really clear destination. Other
Yeah.
times we just need a direction and we need to know, well, what's the next best thing to move me in that direction? And then
Yeah.
the destination will reveal itself in the process. So I don't know. That's just been something I hadn't really thought too closely about that distinction.
No,
And what you were just saying prompted that.
there's an art and a science to it too. And so I think that, and you want to have some balance, right, with everything, but especially, so if you swing the pendulum from the, I'm the person who's gonna, I'll be damned, jump out and go forward to the, well, now I'm gonna take this to heart and go slow to go fast. Go slow to go to fast doesn't mean to like be in constant planning mode and never go, right? And
Or,
so that's
yeah.
the other challenge you have to be aware of, because you don't want to, we're not saying that, we're saying, so therefore, depending on the type of person you are, you might have to give yourself some kind of limits. In other words, a deadline that you have to meet. Like, well, if I'm going to do this, I can't kind of, look myself. It's, a year from now, and I'm still in the kind of like planning stage, right? That's not what I think we're saying here, but it is an idea of that. So you may have to kind of give yourself a bit of a deadline, whether it's a soft or hard, depending on who you're working with or who you are, to move forward to that point. And I guess it's the old Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Caroline, right? Yeah, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So I think from that standpoint, right? Like if you don't know what you're trying to go do, and sometimes there might be, under the whatever you want to say, the, a stop clock is right twice a day, right? So yeah, so you might get those types of sayings in the sense that you're, some dumb luck or other thing that you get there. But having a little bit of forethought, a little bit of planning, whatever it is, again, whether it's work or home, it is really helpful. And then communicating about it to your, whether your constituents, your workplace colleagues, your family, your significant other, whoever it may be, is obviously critical, and no matter what you do.
I think that's such an important part of it. How do you communicate out to other people, especially the people that might be influenced or affected
Yeah.
by the destination that you chose, right? And
Yeah.
so if you spend all this time kind of cultivating what that end should be, and whether it's at work or at home, then you communicate that out and it's not well received.
Well, no,
I
it's a
have.
mention change is scary. So if what you want to do tomorrow is different than what you're doing today, right? Then there may not be well received. But I think getting clarity around the what and the why is important, right? So if you can think almost on one piece of paper on the right side, if you were to just even list out in freehand, what was that, actually on the right side, what are those, like kind of the end state or future state? On the left side of the paper, you could kind of like, well, what is it today? And you can kind of see the differences between, here's whatever it is, right? Here's what's going on today, and what we want to do different than tomorrow is on the right side, what we want it to be, right? And that shows the working back. The space in between is the your aspects of the plan, that those stepping stones that you mentioned that are going to get you there. Now, on the top of the sheet, you could write something along the lines of like, why are we going to make this change? What is it? Why is it important to me, to us? And this is a way to both to validate what you're doing, and to your point before, to communicate others, and more importantly, to potentially, influence them as well, and or kind of bring them into the fold. There's an old consulting trick. If you work with a customer, the moment you get them to draw on what you're presenting, you get their proverbial fingerprints on it. They get bought in when they see their input, their words. So if you're doing this with someone else in mind, whether it's a coworker, a customer, or some family member, invite them to participate and edit. You're not doing this to them, you're doing it with them. And then the bottom part of the paper, you can just see it to the one page. What are the barriers? Like, what's going to make this really hard? Try to get clear on that. If you can kind of look at that on one piece of paper, again, right side where you want to go, left side where you are, the top, like the why, what you're doing, and the bottom, like what's going to make it hard. In the middle, you can kind of then put those stepping stones you're going to take. It gives clarity of both purpose and helps with the communication that you're on the same page with something that's written down that's, kind of with shared input. So that's a way to kind of bridge the gap of both communications and you kind of implied, but I went down the road of we'll call it the managing the change, right? And so those are just aspects to consider when you're doing this, whether you're doing it as a quote unquote consulting engagement in the business front, or you're doing it on the home front with significant other, kids, assuming they're of an age to kind of absorb these types of things.
You know, I was working with a client earlier this week and she did something absolutely brilliant. Like this is
Okay.
all on her own. I can't take credit for
Mhm.
this, but
Okay.
her family had decided that moving into the summertime, they needed to reduce their screen time. And she
Yeah.
was really just concerned about the kids being on the screen all the time, but she was also worried about having to entertain the kids. And so her and her husband had a family business meeting where they rented out a room in the local library and they had the kids like get little briefcases and they had a whiteboard and all of this stuff. And they did so much of what you were just talking about.
Mhm.
Like, well, we're going to say to them, hey, we want you to spend less time on the screens. What are your bucket lists of things that you would like to do that aren't screen time?
Yeah.
And they had, I mean, they treated it like it was a board meeting and had like
I
a
love it.
whiteboard. They had all of these like, markers and they color coded things. And then from there, they developed all these like packets they were going to do together. And it was so phenomenal. And she was showing them to me. And I was like, this is so cool. And so I really, really love that. And I know in workplaces and whether it's workplaces or family, so I run like a little theater. And when I started at the university, there were 5 of us
Okay.
that oversaw that space. And because of COVID and just the changing nature of higher education and what students' needs are and the
Mhm.
students that we're serving,
Right.
well, one, I'm the only faculty member overseeing that now,
Okay.
which is banana pants, but it's also how that space needs to serve students is changing. And
Yeah.
there's so much of a sense of grief and loss at the idea of changing it. Well,
Right.
I'm also really excited at all the possibilities of what it could become. And so I had to sit down and like you said, kind of getting to that why is I had to go, well, what was the original, like, why do we value this? And how can we maintain the value? The thing that I really cared about it was that it was allowing students to engage in creative forms of communication to solve problems. And I'm like, okay, I can do that in a lot of ways that maybe isn't a full blown staged production.
Right.
And so if I can hold on to that, it's just going to look different. And it's not to say that there isn't still some senses of loss or grief with that, but I think that if when I'm moving people through change, if I can say, how do you hold on to the thing that matters most to you? Just recognizing that how you get to that may look different. It helps me. It helps me in those moments.
Yeah, that's great. Audience is going to change not only in the sense that things are evolving for what existed in the world pre-COVID, COVID, post-COVID, but right, every few years, not every year, a new class is being added, one is moving on. So your set of proverbial customers, constituents, in this case, students and participants, is changing and their needs are evolving. So assuming you're doing this not only for yourself and the university, but even more importantly for the students, having some kind of constant way to assess what's working and what's not, and what maybe needs to be adjusted, tweaked, or even maybe overhauled. I imagine it's important to make what you're doing not only exciting for you, but even more importantly, exciting for the folks you want to enlist and enroll and have as active participants in the theater.
Absolutely. And I feel like there's ways that the world is shifting and changing faster than it did before.
Mhm.
It also means that whether it's in our personal lives or our work lives, I think that, having these processes in place, like being able to work backwards, being able to
Yeah,
slow things down so that we know what we're even working towards, while also recognizing that as we work towards it, things might shift.
yeah.
Is so, it's just where we're at.
Yeah. No, I mean, the change is constant, right? Sometimes, and the pace of that always seems like it's accelerating, and even more so now. Not to by no means discount of anything. It's those curves and other things of change are becoming almost crazy. It's becoming days and weeks versus months and years. But in some ways, the principles hold true. You just might need to work through those processes faster, and even more so have a little bit more flexibility. And back to your point before, if you were comfortable with change before, it may be something you want to begin to kind of get a little bit more comfortable with because that pace is only accelerating. But I think if you're aware of where you're heading and constantly kind of checking in on that, and it can make it a little less daunting, and you can kind of do it with a bit more of clarity and purpose.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Howard, are there things that I haven't asked you today that you would like to share?
No, I mean, this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Hopefully, at least we went down the road of thinking, how can you take a potentially stale, boring topic of like, business and corporate life and superimpose it on personal life. And at least for me, that's worked for me a bit. But I think at the end of the day, it's made us a bit more, to use your point, efficient and effective as a family of being open, honest, transparent, and having a bit of a plan and getting stuff done. So I think with that, we've covered a lot today, and it's been really fun and engaging to have this conversation. And really thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. If people wanted to connect with you, how can they do that, Howard?
Yeah, I think I'm in the process I mentioned I think before the launching my executive coaching site and brand. It's going to be called Navigating Next, but the easiest way to reach out right now would be LinkedIn. And glad to chat with folks and hear about their challenges and if they've learned anything here as I'm looking to build my own kind of community to be complementary to the extensive one that you've built here, Danielle, which is really remarkable.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I hope that people will connect with you because it's clear that you have all sorts of tools that could help them navigate next. And I just appreciate this conversation so much. So thank you, Howard.
Hey, thanks for having me. Have a great day.